Welcome to the Fenton Forecast. I'm your host, David Fenton. The mugging at Mar-a-Lago. That's what is happening. Consumers are being mugged by this president as he transfers their hard-earned money to his patrons, the corrupt oil, coal, and gas industry, through higher fuel prices, through higher utility bills, and by Trump stopping cheaper, cleaner solar and wind energy. It's the most corrupt thing in American history. And my guest today is an expert in it. Former Washington State Governor Jay Inslee served 3 terms and passed the most ambitious climate legislation in any state, which is bringing low-cost electric vehicles and getting rid of people's utility bills with solar throughout the state, especially low-income people. Jay is what we all wished more politicians were like: honest, straightforward, down to earth. You'll see for yourself in my interview with Governor Jay Inslee.
Power to the people. Power to the people.
Welcome to the Fenton Forecast. I'm your host, David Fenton, and my guest today is a champion of clean energy and protecting a livable climate. 3-term governor, former Governor Jay Inslee of Washington State, who also served 8 terms in the U.S. Congress. He has many stories to tell. He is still at it. Jay, welcome. We're glad to have you here.
Thanks, David. This is an important thing you're doing. I just love to see your success. You had Billie Eilish's mother on the other day, and you're rocking the world.
Thank you. Trying to in our little way. Well, you and I have something in common where we know too much about climate change, and it's hard not to focus on it.
Well, that's why we're optimists, because we know all the tremendous things that are going on in the clean energy world. So
Yes.
it's the reason we're optimists.
Yeah. And so how are you feeling about our temporary pollution president?
Well, David, I'm not sure that's the place we should start this discussion, to start with a profanity-laced tirade. So I'll try to ameliorate this.
No, I think people want to know what's your description of our current moment.
Well, I think that it's a yin and yang. It's a template, whether we're optimists or pessimists. Obviously, the destruction of the Inflation Reduction Act, and he has slowed us down on the route of progress. And the kind of things he has done sets our blood pressure through the roof when we see him, taking $1 billion of taxpayer money to pay a non-U.S. corporation to not produce wind clean energy. Your blood pressure just goes through the roof when you see that kind of thing. When he basically tries to kill the wind industry and the solar industry. And, I call it the mugging at Mar-a-Lago, where he mugged the U.S. consumers, where he said, look, you give me $1 billion from the oil and gas and coal industry, and I'll kill all the renewable energy industry that competes with you. That type of thing, that corruption is so profound. It just sets your fight or flight instincts on the fight mode. So that part of our experience we have is profound. But, there is another side of the current world we are living in, which is incredible progress that we're making that is before us, that Trump has slowed us down, but he has not stopped us. 92% of all the new generating capacity has been renewable. Solar has now surpassed coal as far as a production source. The price of solar continues to go down. I just looked at the price of batteries. It's come down 120% in the last 15 years. China has now had new construction. 50% of all their cars and sales are now EV. They're 95% in Norway. The price of EVs continues to come down. The pace of progress is astounding. So we live in both parts of our personalities. And it's our job to keep hope alive during this dark moment, and while this shadow exists, to continue to accelerate progress that we have. And, you and I were just talking before we started this. Look, Trump has only given us 4 things: cost, chaos, corruption, and climate denial. That's all he's given us. Mm-hmm. So our job has been harder, But in the sense, we got a better story to tell, which is we have a full capability of building a clean energy economy. It is right there. All we have to do is grab it.
Well, it's happening even with his pushbacks, but and I understand you're an irrepressible optimist, and I agree with you. We're going to solve this. But just to focus a little bit more, because don't assume that people in the audience know how bad it is right now. So, for example, Senator Whitehouse has called Trump Oil Capone, referring to the Chicago gangster Al Capone. And that refers to what Whitehouse describes as Trump's efforts to take customer and taxpayers' money and give it to the fossil fuel industry, which is already the wealthiest industry on earth. So did you ever imagine you'd see this level of corruption?
No, I can't. I don't know if I can top Senator Whitehouse, as I call it, the Mar-a-Lago Mafia or the Mar-a-Lago mugging, because that's what Trump's did. If people don't know this, he basically told them, look, you give me $1 billion to my campaign, and I will shut down your competitors, because the fossil fuel industry is terrified at the competition they have, because they're getting beat by the cheaper energy. The cheapest energy right now is renewable energy, and they're terrified by that. So they gave, they agreed to say, well, we'll give $1 billion and we'll shut down your competition. It is the largest corrupt deal in American history. It has the most damage to the American consumer, forgetting for the moment destroying the planet. To the consumer, this is the cheapest energy. And what he has done is that he has taken away from Americans their access to this cheaper energy. He's basically said, I'm unplugging you from the cheapest source of energy that you can have. And the reason he did that was this corrupt bargain.
And cleanest and healthiest.
Cleanest and healthiest at the same time. So it's cheapest, it's cleanest, it's the healthiest. And by the way, it's the most readily available, because, to build these new fossil fuel plants takes decades sometimes. Yeah. You can plug solar panels in 90 days and get your solar farm going.
China is scaling many gigawatts of solar every week.
So they've improved dramatically. Their percentage is now heavily renewable energy of their new energy sources. We have the full capability of doing that as well. In the current debate, I've been doing some research on this recently about the data centers, which have the unbelievable appetite for, the one data farm I was just reading, was in North Dakota or Wyoming, would have more energy demands than the whole city of New York.
Oh, God.
So, these demands are huge. And the fact is, they're fully capable of now fulfilling those demands with renewable energy. And one of our most important goals at this moment is to assure that the new demands are filled with clean renewable energy and not gas.
Yeah.
Because if we lock ourselves into gas production for these data centers, with their unbelievable increase, it might be like 30% of our whole demand increase is from data centers. That's something that's very important for all of us to be committed to.
Yeah, people don't really understand often, but gas, methane gas, when it hits the atmosphere, is 100 times more powerful in trapping heat on Earth than carbon dioxide per molecule. 100 times.
And what we have found is that the methane leakage from the gas industry is much greater than we originally anticipated. And some of the new research that comes out has demonstrated that. Al Gore has the system now of measuring this, and other measures have saying,
right.
Yeah, it's much more profound and damaging than we thought when you increase gas infrastructure. So that is one of the most important current debates, is to make sure that when we do these data centers, we insist on two things. Number one, that they pay the cost and they don't lay the cost of new transmission lines off on the consumer, so they pay their own freight. I had somebody the other day saying it's like bring your own beer to the party. We need to insist that the data centers and AI developers, bring their own beer to the party to make sure they don't put those costs on the consumers.
Yeah.
And two, we've got to incentivize or have a regulatory structure to make sure that we use clean energy and don't lock ourselves into these long-term commitments. We're fully capable of doing that. We've demonstrated that. I mean, at least I think Microsoft and Google have made this commitment to do this. We're fully capable of doing it. There's no excuse not to do it. So I'm pleased with some of the governors, J.B. Pritzker and others, who have adopted measures to make sure we go in that direction.
Well, back to the corruption, just so people understand how extensive it is, let's take people through for just a minute Trump's dirty energy cabinet members. So we have the former governor of oil drilling North Dakota, Doug Burgum, running the Interior Department, pushing for more oil drilling off our coasts to make a hotter and more polluted planet and a more polluted sea. And we know what industry he works for, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is a parade through the horrible, the list of the most horrible environmental cabinet in any government in any decade in world history, and it's all based on corruption. And it's based on this deal they made with the fossil fuel industry, and he delivered by saying, "I'm going to give you a cadre of people that will make sure we use the dirtiest, most expensive energy available in America," and that's what he's doing in every single one of these departments.
So then we have former fracking gas executive Chris Wright running the Department of Dirty Energy. And of course, he denies that climate change is happening or real, and that's in his economic interest. And then I like to call him Sleaze Zeldin, our EPA administrator, who's turned it into the Environmental Polluters Agency and is getting rid of all the rules so that people can dump more crap in the atmosphere and the water and your food. This is what's happening. And that brings me to another question, Jay. So what do you think about former environmental attorney RFK Jr. participating in this?
Well, he is one of the personal tragedies that we've experienced of a person that did do some decent environmental work, decades ago. And what happened to him personally is still a mystery to many of us, including his family. I'm actually going to the Kennedy compound at Hyannisport next week to talk about some of these issues around AI and clean energy. Basically the question they've asked me to address is, can we build these AI centers ultimately and use clean energy? And the answer is yes.
Yes, of course.
Of course we can do that. We have the innovative system and people are doing it. There's no excuse not to. But anyway, come back to RFK. It is a mystery what happened to him personally. It's sad because he's a person who has had some talent and he just ate too many roadkill rodents or something that got to him. And it really is a tragedy that he has embedded himself in an anti-science administration. And this is the other thing that is so troubling about this. This is an anti-environment all the time administration, but it is also an anti-science administration. We saw that when I had to deal with Trump when he didn't follow the science during COVID, and that cost a lot of lives.
And you were governor.
And when I was a governor, when I had to argue with Trump to get him to follow science, and now he's doing it on clean energy, which he is causing direct health harms by the use of fossil fuels, is not only burning the planet, it's damaging the lungs of our people. It's increasing asthma. It's increasing cardiovascular deaths. There are tens of thousands of deaths who have been scientifically linked to this pollution.
Yeah.
So they are attacking science at its basic. Now, the thing is interesting to me is, that's the basis of American success. I mean, when Kennedy said we're going to the moon, it was based on a confidence of science that we would follow science rather than ideology. And Trump's whole administration is the triumph of ignorance over science and a rejection. This is the largest rejection of science since, they imprisoned Copernicus and Galileo. It's the same kind of thing. Let me give you just one example. So we have a system of buoys. The University of Washington and other colleges have a system of like 350 buoys around the world that are doing this incredibly important research to monitor ocean currents and ocean pH levels and ocean temperatures. This is the thermometer for the world right now. because that's where the vast amounts of energy is stored. And the potential that our ocean currents that would be changed by climate change is actually one of the, sort of catastrophic scenarios which we're concerned about. What is he doing? He's taking the buoys out of the oceans, which costs money. They're already there.
Yep.
Because he is so afraid of the truth. He is so afraid of science. And that willful ignorance, listen, everybody's concerned about artificial intelligence. I'm more concerned about natural stupidity because that's what he is demonstrating in his willful ignorance. It's one thing to be ignorant because you can't figure things out. It's another thing to intentionally blind your community, and that's what he's doing. He's trying to blind America from science.
Is it ignorance or is it corruption? Because, and it's not really him, it's his fossil fuel overlords. Folks, they literally are removing the weather monitoring buoys and the weather monitoring systems and firing the weather scientists and shutting down the whole apparatus so that you won't know that it's getting hotter. That's why they're doing it, right?
Yeah, it's like the monkeys, see no evil, hear no evil. They're just putting their hands in front of their eyes. Hopefully we won't realize how dire this situation is. So I would meld your assessment with mine. It is willful ignorance driven by motivation of corruption.
Yeah.
That's how I would describe it. And that's basically what it is. And, all the previous scandals in American corruption, I like the old days when Richard Nixon, even before Watergate, had to apologize because somebody gave his wife a wool coat and they thought that was corrupt. Those are the good old days. This is corruption with a consequence which is not just monetary, it is physical survival. And that's, in a sense, that's what we're facing. Look, we're facing it right now. Just for a moment, let's talk about what we're facing because of this.
Yeah, I
had to declare. What's that?
Where are you right now?
So I'm sitting on Bainbridge Island. It's a beautiful day on the shores of Puget Sound, but we are experiencing the third year of drought where we have already had to curtail irrigation to major parts of our agricultural community in eastern Washington.
Wow.
Already in June, we've had to curtail water supplies. All of the bull kelp around the island I live on has been exterminated, presumably because of water temperature. They're beautiful. They're kelp forests, and this is pivotal to the whole ecosystem that supports our beautiful orcas and our salmon. And we've had 2 out of the last 5 years, kids have not been able to go out and play in August because of the wildfire smoke from Canadian and Washington fires. So we're experiencing this today, and this is not just a problem for 50 years from now. We're experiencing it today all across the United States. So Trump's corruption has a physical impact, not just a monetary. We're not just offended by our sense of ethics or morality. We are outraged that he is endangering our community and our families and based on corruption. So, we're all focused on cost because he's given us higher priced electricity.
Yeah.
Which is what he's doing. He's taking away cheaper electricity and foisting more expensive electricity on us. He has ordered a coal-fired plant in Washington that we shut down last fall. Shut it down because it wasn't economical. He's ordered it to remain open when nobody will buy the electricity because the electricity is more expensive from the coal-fired plant than other sources of energy that we have here. So he's willfully shackling Americans to more expensive electricity at the moment where we have this inflation caused by his Iran war, which is now over 4% again. We know what's happened to gas prices. So that's the other thing to me is outrageous. He's got us coming and going.
Yep.
He's increased our electrical grid prices by 12, 14, 15% because he's foisting coal-fired electricity and gas-fired electricity, which is more expensive. And in our cars, he's making our gas more expensive by 30, 40%. because of his Iran war. And, you know, I like to say you've never seen a ship going through the Straits of Hormuz carrying a wind turbine
Or solar
or
panel.
a solar panel. They're full of oil. Anyway, so he gets you on your utility bills at your house, which are going up because of his insane policies. Then he gets you at the gas pump when you're driving your car. There's no escaping his corrupt deals. And that's pretty clear.
So let's talk about the Democrats for a minute, because while we're facing a horrendous polluting administration, I'm afraid that not all Democrats are seeing and seizing the opportunity that you've mentioned to take this on. In fact, you've been vocal about this. There are quite a few Democrats engaged what we call climate hushing, which is hush, hush, don't talk about it. People aren't interested in it, and it won't help us win elections. So how do you respond to that?
Well, I would say we should rightfully understand the problem that is in front of Americans that's, you know, 1 week away, which is making your house payment and paying for gas. And we should recognize that the short-term stresses on American families that are most immediate are costs, are inflation. That's the most immediate challenge that is facing Americans. And that has made it more grievous because of Trump's policies. So we rightfully want to talk about costs, perhaps when we talk about energy first. So this is an issue of sequencing about how to talk about the challenges that we face. But all of these challenges have to be addressed and are, frankly, with Democrats if we talk about it in the right way. So what I'm suggesting to my fellow Democrats is we talk about the 4 C's in this sequence. What is Donald Trump and the Republican cult? Because it is a cult, unfortunately, because these politicians follow him right down over the cliff in Congress. He's got them by a little ring in their nose, and they follow him around. So it is a cult. It's more than a party at this moment, which is most unfortunate. So what I'm encouraging my fellow Democrats to talk about is to talk about the 4 C's in this sequence. And Trump and his cult, and it is a cult that will follow him over to doomsday in the Congress. It's very unfortunate. That cult, under his guidance, so to speak, has only given Americans the 4 C's: cost increases, chaos, corruption, and climate denial. And if you talk about them in that sequence, all of the important things can be brought to bear on what we're offering Americans. Number one, cost. So he's given us cost increases by his war in Iran and is by denying Americans access to clean energy. So number one, cost, and I think it's important to start the discussion with that because that's the shortest term challenge that Americans have. Second is chaos. He's given us chaos in foreign policy, chaos in immigration, where he's attacked Americans in Minneapolis, nothing but chaos. Third, corruption. The basis of his entire administration is based on a rotten, stinky, corrupt deal with the fossil fuel industry, which is designed to give Americans higher cost energy and more profits for his buddies in the fossil fuel industry. And fourth, and this is important, he's given us climate denial and clean energy denial. And it's important that this is part of the conversation to make sure that when we talk about our ability to give people cheaper energy, we also talk about giving people cleaner air and a way to fight climate change that does not destroy the health of your families. And that has to be part of the conversation. I do think some of our colleagues have forgotten the power of that, the accuracy of that, and the importance of that in the dialogue. If we're going to, in fact, when we take back the House and when we take back the White House, as I believe we will, that we will be in a position to really attack climate change, to reinstitute some of the successful policies that Trump gutted, to get back to the job of giving people cheaper energy, which is solar, wind, and batteries, to get back to the job of extending access to heat pumps and EV and the technologies that are cheaper and healthier. It's important to make that part of the discussion in campaigns and otherwise. And I believe it's a winning message because Americans, do broadly embrace cheaper, cleaner energy. And most Americans believe climate change is happening, and they are experiencing it today. There's no place in America that has not been touched by the lash of climate change. It's floods in West Virginia and Kentucky. It's fires in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
It's heat domes in Seattle. It's drought in the Midwest. Everywhere has been taught. Look, well, this is an aside, but arguably I almost got killed by climate change last summer in Alaska when I was on a boat watching the glaciers collapse. We were in the Tear Arm, and this glacier, you just see it calving. It's retreated about a mile and a half in the last 40 years. It's so stunning to see the retreat of that glacier. 5 days later, this mountain collapsed. 5 days later, and caused a tsunami 1,500 feet high.
Oh, right. I saw that.
So some people suggest we're getting more instability in our mountains because of the collapse of these glaciers. I don't know if that's true or not. It's just kind of a theory at the moment. But the point is, everyone is experiencing this, and it needs to be part of our discussion.
And we need to talk about it also because, as you were referring to, when the Democrats are in power again, they need the public at their back. They need a mandate to act on this. And the degree of the mandate we need, it seems to me, means that people have to understand what this is better than sometimes they do. Young voters are very concerned about it. But take the Inflation Reduction Act, which was Biden's bill that put massive stimulus into clean energy, which you played such a major role in bringing about, which we can talk about in a minute. That, as you know, only passed by one vote in and that's part of why they were able to repeal it by one vote. So to me, when you win by one vote, it's a win, but it may not be a lasting win if you don't have more public pressure, public knowledge, and public opinion at your back. So if we don't talk about it, we're kind of setting ourselves up for failure, it seems to me. What do you think?
Well, I agree with that. And I think the reason is, and I don't want to be too critical, I'm not running for office this year, so it's easy for me, I suppose, to have an observation. But I think sometimes candidates think it's black and white. You'll talk only about one thing and not two things. These are entirely consistent with another to argue that we have cheaper energy. We're going to respond to the short-term needs of the family as well as the long-term needs. And those things are entirely consistent. And it is important during campaigns to set the stage on how you govern so that people know what you're getting and what you're about. But I also believe this, and this is where sometimes I've parted with some of my colleagues. I remember during the Clinton administration, I ran against an incumbent Republican in 1998. And this is when the Republicans were impeaching Clinton. And I thought that was nuts. And so I ran ads against the impeachment of Bill Clinton. And one of the reasons I did that is because it was such a stark contrast with my opponent who voted to impeach Bill Clinton. And I believe when you have stark contrasts with opponents, even if they're issues that may not be the most important thing to people, if you have a stark contrast that is very clear and inarguable, you ought to use it. And that is certainly the case on energy, costs, solar energy, batteries, and climate change.
And pollution.
And unfortunately, that's the starkest contrast between Democrats and Republicans right now. It is black and white.
Yeah.
They are on the wrong side of history, and it's inarguable because they deny this problem. They refuse to help, and they want to make it worse by chaining us to dirty, polluting, dirty energy. So I argue that go for things that are very clear, differentiating between you and your opponent. And that's one of the most differentiating things. Unfortunately, someday it won't be the case, but right now it is.
Yeah.
So I think it's important of any campaign to embed this as part of your energy message.
And they're going to make it impossible to get insurance. That's happening already. And as you know, when insurance markets collapse, mortgage markets collapse because you can't get a mortgage if you don't have insurance for your home. So I think we definitely must talk about this, and that's part of why I get so frustrated. I'm sure you do too, when people in the media start telling Democrats to moderate and support more fossil fuel drilling, to be moderate. And of course, more fossil fuel drilling, no one says we can get off it right away, but more fossil fuel infrastructure locking us in to destruction, to putting New York City and Seattle underwater. What is moderate about that? I'd like to know.
Well, I think that the issue is no one is saying we're going to shut off all fossil fuel usage tomorrow. No one's making that argument. But we ought not to make massive infrastructure construction that, as you said, locks us in to be doomed in the decades to come. And when you make large fossil fuel-based infrastructure right now that has 50, 60, 70 years lifespan, you essentially are locking yourself into failure in our ability to get off fossil fuels. And that's what we ought to be concerned about right now.
Yeah.
There is no reason that we have to be building gas-powered plants now to fire data centers when other mechanisms are available to us at lower cost, because that is what is happening in many of these data centers. And that's what we should be talking about right now. And again, this is tied to a cost argument. So right now, people are rightfully concerned that the data centers would come on and increase their costs, that they'll be foisting the costs of new transmission and new generating capacity off on consumers. And it's the same argument that we're having to not foist these costs onto the rest of the public. And when you put a data center on and use gas, you're foisting the costs on the consumers, number one, because these are going to be more costly over time. And number two, you're foisting the cost of pollution, of the cost of healthcare and insurance, that your insurance rates are going up because of forest fires precipitated by climate change. So we're simply arguing that people ought to be embedded the costs, and any rational decision means you use cleaner, cheaper energy and less polluting energy over time, because it is cheaper over time. So this climate change message, this clean energy, this health message is consistent with reducing costs. They're not antithetical to one another. And that's why we need to join them, right and the left, in these arguments.
You know, also compared to gas and fossil fuels, once you install solar and wind and battery, most of your costs stop. You don't have to keep paying for fuel. And, you know, I keep telling the solar industry, I think they should adopt a new slogan. The sun can never go up in price.
Well, it's true. It's true. You don't have to worry about hauling sunshine through the Straits of Hormuz.
And the wind can't go up in price either. So, like, that sounds pretty good, right? It's price protection.
Well, there is a certain joyous sound out there. It's the sound of people getting zero utility bills. So I remember I went and met a woman who gets up at 3 o'clock in the morning to pick apples in Toppenish, Washington. And she said, you know, I run out to the mailbox now, like early every month, to get my utility bill. And I said, why do you do that? She says, because I rip open the envelope and it's like zero.
Yeah.
Or, you know, just like $5 or something, because you got us solar panels. And we got her solar panels through the Cap and Invest bill. As you know, we have a program called Cap and Invest.
In Washington State.
In Washington State. And I'm glad California has now also joined us in that nomenclature. It has polluters pay for pollution. That's funded a $4 billion fund. We help Washingtonians get solar panels and heat pumps and reduce their electrical bills and their transportation bills as well. And so it's a joyous thing to not pay a utility bill. I honk my horn every time I drive by a gas station, saying I'm happy because I'm not having to pull into a gas station.
For Exxon.
I had to rent a U-Haul the other day to haul a bunch of stuff, and it's the first time I've had to go to a gas station in about 5 or 7 years. And I thought, this is terrible to have to pay these costs. I'm driving by on, electricity that costs 1/5 as much as gasoline. And now that I'm happy that we've been the first state in the United States, which helps people be able to get used EVs and lease EVs so that lower income people can get access to EVs and don't have to pay this outrageous cost of gasoline, which of course is made worse by Trump's Iran war. So yeah, there's a lot of fun to be had. Nobody's bought an EV and gone back, I'll tell you that. They're too much fun. They accelerate too fast.
I charge my EV with my solar panels, so I run around.
Well, same thing. I got solar panels up there charging my EV.
And you know who else does that? The Pope.
Well, the Pope is right on this.
So let's talk a little bit about what you accomplished in Washington State. You served 3 terms as governor. You were very focused on climate change. You ran for president on climate change in 2020. We'll talk about that too. But you passed the most far-reaching and ambitious and important series of bills in Washington State on climate. The Climate Commitment Act was one. Do you want to tell people briefly what those do?
Well, yes. So I'll go through a little menu as quickly as I can. The grandmother of all was our Climate Commitment Act, and this is the act I talked about, that this creates a limit on pollution in the state of Washington, an absolute legally binding limit. And polluters have to pay for their pollution, and that money goes into a fund that then is redistributed back to Washingtonians to help them, get off of fossil fuels, get cheaper sources of energy and less polluting sources of energy, from solar panels to heat pumps to electric school buses, which people just love. They love those electric school buses. It has been supremely successful. We now are joining the market with California and Quebec to have a larger market. So it's been a very successful thing. And the right-wing fossil fuel industry tried to repeal it, and they put it to a ballot. They said, oh, this is a communist plot. People don't like that. Well, it went to the ballot. We had an election, and Washingtonians affirmed it by 62 to 38. It was a massive landslide of support for this. So these policies have public support when you talk about it in the right way, and they have been very economically successful. We also have the most aggressive building codes in the United States, which make sure that when we build buildings, we get people to have lesser utility bills, because it doesn't do a lot of good if you have the cheapest construction, but then your utility bills is twice what it should be for 50, 60, 100 years in your building. So we're getting people lesser cost housing by reducing the costs of energy by having, simple insulation and the like in your home.
Strong insulating windows.
That's right. And it really reduces your utility bills. We have a low carbon fuel standard, which tries to drive the cost of energy down in transportation, which has been quite successful. We have a 100% clean energy grid requirement that utilities get to 100% clean grids with interim standards in 2030 and 2040, which we're moving forward to. And importantly, we have, I think, probably the greenest transportation infrastructure plan, so that a third of all our investment in transportation infrastructure goes to clean and low carbon fuel systems of public transportation, bike lanes, efficient, safe sidewalks so you can walk to school. Everything we've done, or at least a third of it, goes to, a clean energy sources. So this is a suite of policies which have been economically successful. It's one of the reasons we have one of the highest growth rates in our economy. And they've been very, very successful, but there's more we can do. We've also made some improvements in our built infrastructure. We're trying to improve our zoning laws so we can build more housing to get people more housing. We have a housing homelessness crisis like many states in the United States, and we're trying to increase the availability of housing, particularly without wasting long commutes. So we're building it closer to where people want to work and live, and we're changing our zoning laws. So we've approached this in a way of everything we do is trying to get people to get cheaper, cleaner energy in multiple sources, not just one.
And these are ambitious laws, as I understand it. the state is mandated to get to 45% clean energy by 2030 and 70% by 2040. Is that right?
These are probably some of the most ambitious goals, but I do think there's something worth talking about, and that is that I believe it's more important to do something today and actually get some incremental improvement today than to have a lofty goal for 40 years from now.
Yeah.
That's really how we should judge ourselves. Are we getting something done today? Are we making some cheaper, cleaner energy available today to Americans? That's more important than, something you say, well, by 2050, we're going to be 100%. Yeah. That's an important goal, but what you do today is actually even more important. Action today is more important than gauzy promises tomorrow. That's my viewpoint.
So in 2020, you ran for president. That's when we met. And you made climate change the central message and organizing principle of your campaign. And it was very far-reaching. You wrote a book about clean energy. You ran on clean energy. You said that you'd even make climate change the central focus of American foreign policy. And so what did you learn from that campaign?
Well, it's no secret I ran for president in 2020, but it did seem like a secret at the time to some degree. So, by the way, I stole that line from Al Gore. He used it in his campaign. Well, what did I learn? First off, I learned that I love democracy. I love Americans who care about our country. It was a wonderful experience because I met people who really cared about our country, who had a deep, abiding conviction that we can form a more perfect union. And it was a wonderful experience. People should run for president if they ever have a chance. You'll feel better about America even if you don't win the race. That's number one. Number two, I learned that you can make a difference in a race even if you don't prevail.
Right.
Because our campaign did make a difference. It raised the ambitions by necessity of other candidates. They sort of had to raise their vision to meet our bar, if you will.
On clean energy.
On clean energy. It did have an impact on then Vice President Biden. He did raise his ambitions and used about 90% of our proposals ultimately went into the Inflation Reduction Act. And he has told me that he, credits my efforts in getting him to be more ambitious. So it did have an impact in the ultimate bill that was a miracle. And I credit him and the senators who got this through, the Inflation Reduction Act, which was incredibly successful while it was in existence in getting people cheaper, cleaner energy. So it had an impact. It was very enlightening and inspiring experience. I did not catch fire. There were 22 candidates that year, 20 or 22 candidates. I was like 21 of them who did not catch fire.
Yeah,
so
even all fit on the same debate stage.
Right, and for whatever reason, so many people experienced that, but we moved the needle, and it was an important needle to move, and I feel good about it. And we're going to be back. We're going to have somebody in the White House. And they're going to pick up this mantle again. And hopefully when we take back at least the House, maybe the Senate this November, and I hope everybody listening to this gets involved in some campaigns this year because so much is on the table. And we can start to at least reduce some of Trump's damage when we take one or both chambers this November. That can slow down his assault on clean energy in a variety of ways. So this November is a big, big race.
So, a lot of young people are very discouraged about our democracy because they correctly see how corrupt it is. And it's more corrupt than ever, thanks to I like to call them the Supreme Court of partisan thugs, who allow unlimited amounts of money into our campaigns and more corruption. So what do you say to young people about this? There have been other corrupt periods in American history that we came out of. How do you view this?
Well, this isn't very poetic or something that Oprah would say or something. Is like, what are you going to do about it? what are you going to do about it? Okay, you're right. You're unhappy about it? Stinks, rotten, corruption, Trump's insane, sociopath, narcissist. What are you going to do about it? I mean, it's like you're going to sit around and mope around about it, and no, go do something about it. And so I have, somewhat less patience with folks that say, oh, it's corrupt, so I'm not going to participate. No, you get in there and roll up your sleeve and do something. I'll go get somebody elected. And I guess the most important message there is that we do have agencies. Things do change.
Yeah.
Things can change. And I think that's the only thing good about aging is that you get a perspective that change is possible. During your lifetime and my lifetime, you think about the struggles in civil rights that you were involved in early in your career of witnessing the civil rights struggles, and things changed. My wife didn't get to participate in athletics when we were in high school. Think about that. There were no women's athletics when we were in high school. But because of Title IX and others, and by the way, my dad helped in this when he was athletic director, those things changed. You think about people weren't able to love who they loved 40 years ago. Now you can be married. Things can change. So I think people of our age have two goals. Number one, not continence people saying that they don't want to be involved. And two, make sure they understand they do have agency and we do have the capability of changing things. And by the way, on climate, let me mention one thing that I do think is important. Sometimes we forget. We have actually, from the pre-Paris Rio projections on what the projections were for global temperatures,
Yeah.
compared to the projections now, have actually come down almost to centigrade. So there has been improvement.
Centigrade, which is about 1.7 degrees Fahrenheit.
Right. So
People.
as to
It was
what
gonna
was
be
projected,
worse
as
until
to
the
what
clean
was
energy
projected
progress.
before the Paris Agreement,
Yeah.
compared to the projections now, they have come down. Now they're still in the red zone of unbelievable danger that we have, but we have had progress. I think it's important to note that.
Yes, I agree. But progress also comes from promulgating and promoting solutions. So, you served 8 terms in Congress, 3 terms as governor, you ran for president. You saw up close the influence of money on the system that the Supreme Court has made worse. And now we have these billionaires and soon trillionaires who are spending enormous amounts of unlimited money against candidates they don't like. And the crypto industry is doing the same. I mean, it's at next level now. So if you were going to suggest that Democrats campaign on a platform to reduce corruption, what would be 2 or 3 of the main points you would say they should campaign on? Because people hate corruption. Most Republicans hate corruption.
Well, what I would say is to point to the most obvious, largest source of corruption. There's all kinds of corruption in the Trump administration. The crypto deals, the deals with, I can't even remember. I can't keep tabs on it. It happens every day. The deal with, he strikes some deal with Turkey or one of these other countries, and 4 days later, his kid gets a franchise for $1 billion hotel or something. They're striking these deals like every week. But I would suggest that those are the minor leagues of corruption. I would point to the major leagues, which is the effort to force higher cost energy costs on Americans simply to feather the nest of his buddies and ultimately his campaign accounts. That's the major league corruption. It's also tied most to Americans' lived experience, because the corrupt deals about Turkish hotels and crypto is corrupt, it's terrible, it's awful. But the thing that's actually tied to what Americans are experiencing is the corruption around energy, which is forcing their costs to go up. So I would start and end there on the thing that's really helping or hurting Americans' pocketbooks the most.
Okay, but structurally, if we were going to lower the impact of money on our politics, I mean, as you know, the famous quote from Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis, who said, you can have a democracy or you can have great concentrations of wealth, but you can't have both. So I'm asking, if you were running for office again, what would you say we need to do? Because everybody thinks the system is rotten, and that is not healthy.
Well, what I would do is to be undaunted. I think that's the most important. We need to be undaunted by this fact that money is so pervasive. United Citizens has, eliminated a large part of our campaign laws. So yes, it is more difficult, but I would be undaunted for this reason. Time and time again, we have shown we can win races even though being outspent. It has happened time and time again. Every race I was ever in, I think, I was outspent. But I had messages that showed a powerful vision. I had enough moxie to understand the importance of showing clear contrast, which now we should do on clean energy and climate change. And that I had, people who, and I just outworked my opponents as well. I doorbelled, 28,000 homes when I first ran for legislative body and won to beat a Republican.
A lot of button pushing.
What's that?
That's a lot of button pushing.
Oh, yes, I did. I wore out shoes. I got blisters to show it. And so, the fact that you're outspent just should not be a reason not to run and not to put pedal to the metal on what we can do, because we have these winning messages. So, and these races are competitive right now. The other thing I would say is people can make a difference. You can make a difference in these things. I've just seen it time and time again. Some ambitious young person wants to run for a city council or state legislature race, gets in a race, boom, they get elected, then they end up in Congress someday. I mean, you can make a difference. You can make a difference helping a candidate. Small example, okay? This isn't earth-shaking, but I'll just give you a personal example. So when I ran for the state legislature, I was nobody. I was running against a popular woman who was a city mayor in a very heavily 60% Republican district. Nobody gave me a chance. And I was sitting around making yard signs one day with my basketball playing buddy. He was helping me. And I was just pacing around, worried about my campaign, didn't seem to be going anywhere. And he took a sign and he shoved it in my face. He says, "Jay, just get out of here. Go stand on a street corner, hold your sign. I don't want to hear your moaning anymore and griping and your worries and everything." So I went out and started holding my sign on the street corners, which nobody had ever done before in my area. And I did it for 2 months. And I'd get up at 6 o'clock in the morning, I'd hold my sign, I'd wave hello to people with coffee on their way to their work. I won in a total upset simply because I went out and held my sign on the street corners. And I did it because I had a buddy, his name was Phil Klein. I played basketball with him. He was called the franchise because he was a big guy, good basketball player, because he helped me. And that got me elected. And I ended up 3-term governor. And I'm just saying, you can make a difference in these races. Anybody can do it. Go help somebody, get them elected.
And you can do grassroots fundraising. It's all true.
Yes, you can.
Speaking of the Supreme Court, you've been speaking out recently about the attempt, and this is actually happening, folks, by the slimy oil industry to try to get immunity from liability for the way they have knowingly heated the planet and destroyed the climate. They've known they were doing this for 50 years. We have all the evidence from the lawsuits. We have the minutes of their meetings. Their scientists told them exactly how hot it was going to get from their products. They predicted the temperatures of this year, almost on the mark. And they're trying to, since they know they're culpable and they're criminal, they're trying to get the courts to give them immunity from prosecution, like the gun industry got. So you're trying to speak out about this. Tell us about it.
Well, we think there should be one unifying principle in America that we all should agree on, of every political stripe, which is nobody should be above the law. And fortunately, Americans do believe that. There's kind of a fundamental belief that nobody's a king, nobody should be able to be held not accountable for their misdeeds. And that is powering our effort to stop the fossil fuel industry, particularly the oil and gas industry, from becoming immune from lawsuits. They want to avoid being accountable for the damage they have caused. And they have two assaults on that fundamental American viewpoint that nobody should be above the law. One is in the courts, where they're seeking the courts to give them immunity, and two is in the Congress, and they have a bill now they've dropped in the Congress to try to give them total immunity. I'm working to try to stop that outrage on both fronts. I'm working with a group called the Center for Climate Integrity. It supports litigation against the oil and gas industry. We're actually delivering a petition of about 125,000 signatures to Congress here when I'm back there next week to prevent this bill to go through that would allow them to escape any accountability for their actions. And the fossil fuel industry, the oil and company execs are absolutely terrified of having to be held to account in front of a jury. And they're being terrified is legitimate.
Yeah.
Because when jurors read these memos that go back decades of the oil company executives knowing the damage they were going to cause, knowing the catastrophic health impacts that their product was going to cause, and they've known this for 50 or 60 years. And it's very important what you noted, they're scientifically very incredibly geniuses scientifically, because they predicted almost to the 10th of a degree what was going to happen. It was amazing how accurate they were about the devastation that their own product was going to cause. And so these oil executives are terrified of sitting there, because what's going to happen? I'm an old trial lawyer, so I've been around the bush on this. Reading, Mr. Vice President of Oil and Company, would you please read the memo that your predecessor wrote to the jurors? And it's going to read, Dear Board of X Oil Company, our product's going to cause catastrophic losses that could be civilization ending if we don't change this product. And then you say, what did you do about that, Mr. Vice President, when you got that information? And they're going to go, blah, 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 blah. And they're going to be, the jurors will be outraged. And so they rightfully are afraid of being held account.
But what they did is they decided to lie about it.
But they decided to lie about it. They're merchants of doubt, just like the tobacco industry. They adopted a very concerted effort, and the lawsuits against them are based on deceit and fraud and consumer violations, because they created doubt when there was no doubt about this. And they spent, millions to try to create doubt. And so that's why the basis of these lawsuits. And, to some degree they were successful. And obviously they've had one party that has worked for them day and night, which is the Trump cult Republican Party, unfortunately, has worked for them to try to create doubt where there is no doubt. So it's very important for us to win this battle on behalf of American consumers, both in court and in Congress and in state legislative bodies. So they're trying to do this state by state as well. They actually did get an immunity provision in Utah, and they've dropped bills in various states to do the same thing. So we're trying to be Paul Revere. The oil and gas industry is coming for your rights, and to try to head them off the pass.
Yeah, and we need their money to mitigate and to harden the against climate change and to educate people about it, just like we did with the tobacco industry. I was very involved in the lawsuits and the pushback against the tobacco industry that ended up banning their advertising to children and getting a huge settlement. And we used the money to help teach kids that they shouldn't smoke, and it was very successful. So yeah,
it's the same movie, and again, it's the fact that they want us to pay for their damages. So in Miami, I remember Miami Beach, met the mayor down there. They had to raise their main street like 8 feet because of the flooding.
Right.
So when you go there now, when you walk down the main street, you go down the steps to the stores. It's kind of weird. The cost of that has been borne by Miami taxpayers,
right?
Not the oil and gas industries, the ones who are responsible for that problem of sea level rise and flooding. Right. So they're trying to foist those costs on the taxpayers and on the consumers. And we're saying, no. This was your fault. You're responsible. You should have to pay for these provisions to keep our houses from flooding and our houses from burning down, and the fact that we can't get insurance now to build a house or to rebuild a house in Altadena. And in my state, we're finding horrendous difficulty getting insurance right now. Those costs ought to be on you,
Yeah.
not the Americans.
Hey, Noah, when we edit, mark this moment. Hey, Jay, I think you're banging your table or your microphone a little bit in your enthusiasm.
Yes, I will try to not pound the table quite as much.
Right. So back to the interview. So in the time we have left, Governor, tell us a little bit about how did this happen to you? How did you become so committed to the planet and to the environment and to protecting nature and people? Where did this come from? I understand your father had a lot to do with that. Is that right?
Well, I think there's two things in my life that has led me to be pounding the table on occasion on this subject. One is just my connection to nature, and it's been very close. And two is my connection to my kids and my grandkids and someday great-grandkids. And those two twin motivations are what drive me. And they're twin, they're connected. So I remember my dad was a biology teacher, and we spent a lot of times outdoors. He helped revegetate my mom, the alpine meadows up on the slopes of Mount Rainier. And some of my fondest memories, I remember he'd take me down to the beach in Carkeek Park. And I remember he would, I'd turn over a rock and I'd see a limpet. He would explain to me how a limpet worked. That's the little, it looks like a little cap on a rock. And I remember watching my grandson when he was about 6, turning over rocks down here on the beach on Bainbridge Island, and just the expression on his face of that joy at experiencing that life form. And I remember I felt that same joy in life and seeing an orca, in being up skiing, climbing mountains, walking through the trees, the bird life, which is so profuse. It's the combination of that personal enjoyment of nature and the joy I see in my grandchildren and my children who've experienced the same thing. 3 of my sons all work in sort of the outdoor world now. Oh. One builds bike trails, one takes people who are blind skiing, one works for the state park. So it's kind of a family affair as well. So those things that I hold most sacred are now at great risk. And I understand that, and I look at this from kind of a generational perspective as well. We've been a very fortunate generation, the baby boomers. We're the richest generation in world history. We've been pampered. And I feel we have got an obligation as we leave this stage to give our grandchildren a shot at enjoying what we enjoyed. And if they're going to have a shot at that, we have to do something about this. So it's a multi-factored, and it's also fun because you get to meet amazing people that are doing some great things. I meet people every day who are involved in this struggle. I met a guy the other day who's a battery developer who puts in these battery farms in combination with solar energy, who pointed out we've had a 120% decrease in the cost of battery storage in the last 15 years, and gave me hope on how we can do data centers, but not, putting in gas-powered forms. I'm working with these companies. I'm doing some advising of an equity company that helps do investments in clean energy. I met this company that has a way of cleaning dirt so that you don't get toxicity in dredging and the like. I mean, every day I meet people that are uplifting. I meet young people who are involving political action, that are getting out there and changing young people. I mean, this is an inspiring thing. I didn't get to participate in the civil rights struggle. I was a little young. I didn't quite get it in time, maybe not as much as you did. But this is one that is equally inspiring in my view.
Yeah. Well, it's a sacred connection to the planet and the people. We have to do our part. It's our common home. And the illusion that I'm afraid too many so-called conservatives had, that everybody is separate, that everything is separate. Physics proves it's not true. There's no separate. You know, we have quantum entanglement. We have the butterfly effect. What we do affects everybody else. And so, you know, it's like the Native American saying that, you know, in your actions, think of 7 generations ahead. So that's the spiritual, moral, and ethical thing to do. It's also very practical because, you know, there are a lot of good parts of humanity and we'd like to see it continue, wouldn't we?
Yes, and I would suggest we have kind of a magic moment in the climate effort. You know, we've been involved in this for 3 decades myself, as you have been. But I think this is a magic moment because we can join that kind of existential view that all things are connected and we've got this obligation to our grandchildren. That's a moral responsibility. It's an emotional connection. But for the first time, we can join it with a very practical, down-home demonstration that this is the smartest economic thing we can do because these clean energy sources are the cheapest sources of energy and the most readily available because you can actually build them overnight, unlike these, you know, fossil fuel infrastructure. So for the first time, we can join the emotional commitment we have to this, to the practical, common sense, pay your bills part of this mission statement. And those two things joined appropriately can win a lot of races and advance the ball. It's a magic moment.
As long as we talk about it.
That's right.
Okay, well, Governor Inslee, thank you so much for spending time with us on the Fenton Forecast.
Thank you, David. Keep talking.
We welcome your comments. Please write to us at hello@fentonforecast.com, hello@fentonforecast.com. Thank you, Governor. Thanks again.
And check out Climate Power as well, another group I'm working
You're
with.
helping them, climatepower.org, right?
There you go.
Okay, terrific. So long.